Mike Grant, Senior Vice President, RX Global. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Dan.
Mike, you've been in this industry a long time. How did you get into this?
I wish I could tell you that I went to a degree program in college, but that's not the case. After I did graduate college with a degree in broadcast journalism, thinking I was going to be in sports, and I had some internships with Major League Baseball before that. I just got bored of it. I got bored of the production side, cameras and video equipment and so on too. It wasn't really what was captivating or driving me. Started working in restaurants while living at home, and ultimately packed the car and moved to Washington, D.C. without a job and sort of empty room with some high school buddies of mine, and ultimately fell into the industry by temping for a trade association. That association was National Association of Broadcasters, which was intriguing, and they ran one of the largest trade shows in the country at the time. This is the late 80s at this point. I came in as the grunt that did everything from drive VIPs to paper filing, working on hotel projects, and it became logistical in nature. And the next thing I know, they hired me, and I stayed there for 11 years.
How long have you been at RX?
So I left Broadcasters in 2000. Again, a trade association, not for profit, ran one or two live events, and was in my blood at that point after a decade of doing it. And I heard about an opportunity in Connecticut, where I'm from, which was with a global show organizer, which is now for profit, very margin driven. We're counting nickels at this point, that ran 40 to 50 shows annually. And so a dynamic business growing. You think about that time period, the economy was very good, was strong. There was a lot of money coming into live events, particularly in North America. And I got the opportunity to sort of trial that. And I didn't love it at first, I'll tell you that. It was a lot of travel. I had young kids at the time. And I was living out of a suitcase, show to show to show to show. But ultimately, I learned so much that I think it served me well, and I found good mentors and good people to sort of guide me through there. And I've been with Broadcasters again 11 years, but I've been with what was formerly Reed Exhibitions, now RX Global, for 24 years now.
It's awesome. Yeah. By the way, I've always loved your voice. I think I think broadcast could have been a fit.
I get that often. I think I missed my opportunity for maybe it's a face for radio too. I don't know, but
well,
thank you.
Face for radio, I've got for sure. You're at RX, and you guys do a lot of events a year. And I think talking about how to scale, you're basically a professional services company. You obviously have production. When you talk about scaling your team, it's difficult. What has been the successful, things you've implemented to really develop great, production leaders or, people that run your shows?
It does take a village to put on what we do. And, the reality of my job, an operations guy, live event space, is we basically sub every service out that we need. We're not laborers, we're not technicians, we're not experts in AV or security or any manner of those things, general contracting, whatever that is. What we were good at is planning, logistics, managing air traffic control, if you will, managing multiple vendors to pull off a common goal. And that was a trade show.
Yeah.
But we did that with great partners. And I really was fortunate in my career either to have a great mentor, but also have people that would come, and many of which came from those partners we had, whether it was general contractors, venues, often came with a tremendous amount of skill and served us so well. They really were experts in the field and became a great team that I had. And pre-pandemic, I think that team was, operations alone was probably 33 people.
Right.
We're now down below 20, and that's what COVID and the pandemic will do. And I think we're now that much more beholden to those third parties and people that do things like you do.
Touch on that. Like before we touch on the difference in how you manage security at your events, how's it evolved over these 20 plus years? Think back to when basically you had a paper credential, and that was about the level of security you had at an event. The evolution has been significant. Just from your perspective as owning the event or JV the event, and you're looking at this additional cost how do you balance that?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and really relative to a P&L or a balance sheet security like busing or AV, other expenses, was a drag on margin, you know, and we would plan for more, and then we'd walk into a budget meeting every summer, and the CFO would say, nope, you got to cut that. But we hadn't experienced a lot of things we had. We hadn't experienced, early in my career, 9/11 yet.
Right.
We hadn't experienced any orchestrated attacks, things like that too. So security was really a mandate of venues that we operated in to say you have to have a third-party security agency in here. And I hate to say it, but it was a check-the-box exercise. Yes, we're fulfilling our obligation. We've got those bodies, those guys in uniform, that are really looking for validation of badges. If it's further along, it was accreditation and a scanner. Maybe they might check a QR code or some manner of oversight there. But that's really the extent of it. If we had a bigger problem, it was usually engaging with the venue and so on too. Fast forward, and the company I work for, I think, expands dynamically into consumer-driven events as well, too. Now we're talking about not tens of thousands of people, in some cases hundreds of thousands of people. That became a scary endeavor. We realized we're over our heads. We don't have that level of expertise. We need more. We didn't find our security partners to be really more than, paid by the hour guard force, temp labor, basically, too. We needed strategy, not tactical measures that were reactionary. I think we definitely needed more planning, proactive foresight about what was ahead, to really think about inevitabilities or eventualities that may happen that we otherwise wouldn't have, and we needed partners for that.
Right, you've also gone down the path of hiring an in-house person to manage all this. Talk about the difference between having, just an in-house full-time employee, 40 plus events a year, versus kind of coming to a company like ours and the pros and cons of working with a third party to help build that strategy.
Yeah, I think we learned a bit of a hard lesson there too, and I was very much a proponent for bringing expertise in-house. I knew I didn't have it, I knew the people that worked for me did not have it. We were just writing checks and trying to get the best possible deal, if you will. But then, as I just said, the changing dynamic that we're now into consumer shows, everything from Hollywood studio-driven events to New York Comic Con, the largest event we do in North America. And I would go into these events, with a sense of trepidation, with a great deal of nervousness about that volume of people in a small building, soft target that's getting a lot of media exposure and so on too. And it really ultimately had ourselves audited. We brought in a third party that does some M&A work for us as well too, and had ourselves audited from a security standpoint. And it just pointed out exactly what you said. We do not have that level of expertise. We need strategy, we need knowledge, and we really got to implement some better plans than we already have. That elicited a search for a full-time security director to come in-house. And we've got a lot of the acronyms in there, as you can imagine there. Ultimately settled on a gentleman who was former Secret Service. And he did a good job for the time that he was there. He wasn't strategic in nature. He was very tactical. So his answer to delivery and coverage was to go to every show.
Right.
And it was unsustainable. He burned himself out. We couldn't do it. As we're growing dynamically, we've got half the businesses in consumer-driven events, and that was really the focus for him. And on the B2B side, we have high-value goods shows like JCK, the jewelry show. We needed him there as well too. But eventually, it was unsustainable, and he had to leave. And that's really when I had sort of started engaged some of our security experts, Unified Command, and other vendors that had said, I've heard this story before. You need more than you have here.
Right.
You need a level of service and partnership that's not going to be driven by a single individual. It's in-house.
Right. Think back to what's the toughest day you've had in the industry?
I knew you were going to ask that question, and it was one that it didn't take me long to come to a conclusion on. I've had a lot of bad days. I think we all have. You're in the live events, and that is problem solving on steroids. And But there's certainly levels and degrees of problems. The one that really sort of stands out the most to me was October 1st. And I'm in Las Vegas on Sunday night trying to open what was it was a casino gaming show that we run. We're opening the heavy conference program the next morning, Monday morning. The full expo is going to open on Tuesday. And my phone rings at 10:30 or 11 o'clock that night. And it was a colleague of mine who happened to live in Las Vegas and said, you need to turn on the news right now, Till.
Right.
Early reports were isolated. An individual here was killed in a orchestrated attack on a festival ground. That number changed dramatically over the next few hours. We at the time we were trying to balance what needed to happen next, and we sort of created a war room in one of the hotel rooms at the Venetian where we were at the time. My security lead was at another show that was New York Comic Con, so here we are without the expert and the individual we need the most at that time. We are a global company with a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of oversight and so on too. We're based in London. So here I am on the West Coast on Pacific time, and I need to talk to London immediately. I need to talk to our HR people and talk to our attorneys. We have anywhere from 70, 80, 100 staff in town at Vegas to put on this show at the time. The immediate need was about finding where those people are.
Right.
It's not that late. Maybe it is for an older guy like me, but if you're in your mid-20s, you're probably not in bed yet. And we had to find every one of those individuals. And when we couldn't find them or reach them, we worked with the hotel to either ring that room or literally open the doors to make sure. We did bed checks on everybody. It's a global show, so we have colleagues from all over the world that are there. I think it came down to a couple of individuals, one of which was from Australia, that we could not find until the next morning, and we had the worst possible thoughts about that nature of that. And was this an individual who maybe attended the event, and we cannot find that person right now too. Eventually we did. But through the night, it was crisis management. It was finding these people, getting direction from attorneys, from risk management, from HR staff, and so on, to find the individuals. The next segue, which was the next morning, was, do we open this show?
Right.
Will it be insensitive? 50 plus people were killed the night before. But this was a casino gaming, driving the economy of Las Vegas, and we made it a decision to forge ahead. With certainly the respect and sympathy to all parties concerned there.
But that's the challenge. Is it the right thing to do?
Correct.
Is it safe? Is it the right thing to do?
Right.
How did you get to yes, it's the right thing to do?
Well, I think it was engagement with an association partner at the time about is this right? Is it insensitive to carry on? And if we do carry on, can we do it safely?
Right.
The decision was made by engaging the biggest companies in Las Vegas, many of the bigger slot machine manufacturers and so on too, who already had 1 million people in town. And the thought was, let's do it with sensitivity, open the doors, honor the people that were lost, but forge ahead. And the next segue was, okay, how do we engage? How do we bring in security to a degree that's going to make people feel safe that are there? Because it was an open question about, was this an isolated incident? Is there more in town? What do we do about this? That became an exercise in engagement with local law enforcement and police presence that was significant.
Yeah.
And that outwardly showed people, okay, this is going to be a safe environment to be in. I may feel awkward about being here, but I can tell they've taken steps to protect me.
And you were able to get the resources that morning?
It was tough. It was tough, as you can imagine, because the town was in chaos, but we were able to bring in everybody that is possible that we could have in uniform, undercover as well, too. So the presence was strong. We had police vehicles out front. And obviously the messaging was very critical about, how is this going to be perceived?
Right.
And not as bad as I could have possibly imagined. I think people understood, and it was a somber atmosphere, but we carried on and did business and honored those people.
It's you bring back a memory. I got that phone call at, I guess, 1:30 in the morning, because we were loading a show in also for another client. And, you think through that phone call, you turn on the news, and, it's your worst nightmare. Something completely out of your control, whether you're in that city or whether you actually were involved in that event, because it was outside of their control.
That's right.
And I ended up on a flight to San Francisco. I was on a flight. I had a flight planned to San Francisco, and my team is in Vegas, and I'm trying to keep up with them, while I'm flying, to make sure that we were doing everything for the show that we were loading in. Was a couple days after yours started, so we had a little bit of period there to try and pull everything together. But I remember flying to Vegas and 24, 48 hours later, and it was a different feeling for sure.
It definitely was.
What lesson would you take out of that experience that you've implemented, or lessons?
I think that the biggest one for me was we felt isolated at the time. I think we needed answers. We needed to have better plans in place, whether it's crisis management plans that we could put into effect immediately. Short of that, we put our heads together and said, these are the 5 things that need to happen immediately right now. We divided and conquered. But I would have much preferred a well thought out strategic plan about the messaging, next steps, what are we going to do, who are we going to talk to. I think initially it was a communications plan that grew into a crisis plan, and I think we were unprepared to enact that as quickly as we would have liked. And I think since then, we've taken a lot of that to heart and really are trying to put some standardization and SOP into what if scenarios like that.
I saw probably a year after the Route 91 tragedy, the FBI director for the region was day one that day, October 1st. Uh-huh. And he did a presentation, and he showed a time lapse of the 911 calls that night, not only over time but where they were. So when you're talking about trying to find your staff, the 911 calls were from the runway. People fled, right, from this hotel, from that hotel, and it's the same message. There's a shooting. Well, wait, is there shooting on the runway? Or is there shooting in this hotel? People just naturally are just reporting once they got to a place where they felt safe and make a phone call. So the misinformation that the authorities are dealing with that night, because they're responding to each of these calls when it was one incident at one location, is amazing. And so when you talk about that crisis management plan, that communications plan, that decision making, and trying to fight for information, it's a huge challenge. On any scenario, let alone something that tragic. What would your advice be, if someone wants to get into a leadership role in this industry? What's your advice to them?
I think it's really investing yourself, being open to trying every aspect of this job. And like I said, I started this literally by filing. This is before the internet. It was before a lot of the technology that we have right now. So it's a roll up your sleeve and do every bit of this and figure out what part of it you like the most. For me, it became operations. I think if I had advice for anybody, it's find somebody that does something that's interesting to you.
Yeah.
Let that person give you information. Let that person mentor you. Follow, shadow that person. Ask as many questions as you possibly can to figure out if it's something you want to do. I think it becomes in your blood eventually if you like it enough. And it's sort of like it's too late for me to turn back, I think. And I've seen people wash out of this business. I'm sure you have as well, too, that maybe you've done it for 2, 3, 5 years, and eventually it's just like, this is not what I signed up for. It's probably more work, more evenings, more holidays, more weekends, and so on, too. But for those of us who are still here, it is hugely rewarding and fulfilling.
It is. Next 3 to 5 years, security, events, where do you see the biggest challenges?
I know we're still running a big business that's publicly traded, and internally the budget's going to be a challenge for us. It always will. I know all your customers probably say that as well too. I think are trying to introduce as much security and ideally weapons protection into live events, particularly business-to-business events. To me, would be a goal, but it's a heavy burden to sort of push that forward.
Sure.
Not just from an event P&L standpoint and the cost basis associated with it. I think there is a perception that we need to get past that says something is inherently unsafe because you have a barrier, because you have weapons detection in some kind. When I would challenge that and say, I think the opposite is true, is somebody's investing in my safety while I'm here as well.
Right.
Too.
Totally agree. Mike, I appreciate your time. Really appreciate your busy schedule, and not only right now, but the summit for the next 2 days. I really
I'm
appreciate it.
happy to be here. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, man.
You got it, buddy.